Welcome to Tokyo Wave, recorded in a live studio in Harajuku, Japan, with your hosts Aaron and Parker. Alright everyone, welcome to episode 49 of Tokyo Wave. We are your hosts Aaron Randall
and Parker Allen. Today we are joined by a special guest, David Wagner, media training specialist, public relations industry veteran, and Japan specialist.
On Tokyo Wave, we bring you weekly updates from our studio in Harajuku.
Join us in segments featuring this week's top news,
Political happenings,
business,
and other random garbage.
Here are this week's top news highlights.
Japan Prime Minister Suga to visit US in first half of April for talks with Biden.
France lifts pandemic travel ban for Japan and 6 other nations.
Tokyo Electric Power Company chief skips Fukushima visit on anniversary, citing coronavirus. This week in Japan.
So here's this week's top news item. Japan Prime Minister Suga to visit the United States in the first half of April for talks with President Biden.
Kyodo News has reported that Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga plans to visit the United States in the first half of April for talks with President Joe Biden.
Chief Cabinet Secretary Katsunobu Kato said at a news conference that if all goes as planned, Suga will become the first foreign leader to meet with Biden in person since the Democrat captured the White House in January.
Kato said, "We hope to further strengthen bilateral ties, including the Japan-US alliance, and confirm close cooperation toward realizing a free and open Indo-Pacific."
The Japanese government has been eager to arrange a meeting between the two leaders as soon as possible. They agreed on holding one at an early date in telephone talks in January.
Biden picked Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as his counterpart for what the White House called his first bilateral meeting since taking office, but he used a virtual format for the talks.
Trudeau, you're on mute.
I mean, this is good news, right? International travel of a very high and prominent leader.
But has he been vaccinated? I don't think we know that yet.
No, maybe that's why he's going.
To get the vax.
Yeah, because it's the rollout's too slow here, right?
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, it's no problem, Yoshi.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Up next, France lifts pandemic travel ban for Japan and 6 other nations.
The French government has said it will remove Japan and 6 other countries from a travel ban imposed on non-European Union nations since late January to prevent the spread of variants of coronavirus.
While the travel ban targeting non-essential trips will be dropped as of Friday for the 7 countries, travelers between France and these countries will still be required to present documents proving they tested negative for the coronavirus 72 hours prior to departure and that they love croissants.
Other countries include Australia, Britain, and South Korea.
On January 31st, France imposed the travel restrictions on countries outside the EU. The measure will continue to apply to non-EU countries other than the 7.
Cool, so how does this apply to us? Can we go to France now, back and forth?
It depends. Do you like croissant?
Alright, and up next, Tokyo Electric Power Company chief skips Fukushima visit on anniversary, citing coronavirus.
Kyodo News has also reported that the president of the operator of the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, decided not to visit the nuclear complex on March 11th, the anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami that triggered the nuclear crisis, citing the coronavirus pandemic as the reason for not attending.
So this is the first time since the disaster occurred that Tokyo Electric Power Company Holdings Incorporated has marked March 11th without sending its president to Fukushima.
Tomoaki Kobayakawa, the current head of the utility, also did not hold a press conference while issuing a statement.
Kobayakawa said in a statement,
"There's no change in our stance that our company will fulfill our responsibility for the rebuilding of the area and decommissioning. We would like to work side by side with the people of Fukushima and carry out activities to meet the needs of the area."
Following the magnitude 9.0 earthquake and subsequent tsunami a decade ago, the number 1 and number 3 reactors at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant suffered meltdowns, while hydrogen explosions damaged the buildings housing the numbers 1, 3, and 4 reactors. This became the worst nuclear crisis since Chernobyl in 1986.
According to TEPCO, the scrapping of the plant faces multiple hurdles and is expected to take until 2051.
At the headquarters of TEPCO in Tokyo, Kobayakawa told employees that much work remains to be done. The company did not hold any ceremony, and workers listened to his remarks remotely.
We should exercise our responsibility for Fukushima without drawing a line on the 10th anniversary and letting memories of the accident fade.
With or without letting the memories fade?
I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, if the shacho of TEPCO shows up, I feel he's just going to have like stuff thrown at him.
Well, the nice thing about going to visit the complex is that there's not really a lot of stuff around it, and not a whole lot of people want to roll up in the immediate area surrounding the complex because of the huge stigma and still non-zero fears that there might be some sort of nuclear something still in the atmosphere. So
Right.
there is nobody or no thing to throw anything at him because they're all scared of the place.
I just imagine like TEPCO is currently running like an ad campaign talking about how safe the region is, and they ask, the shacho like, oh, do you want to go visit? He's like, I'm not going there.
Well, it's actually kind of funny though, because I don't know if funny is the right word, but they actually built a museum there.
Oh, really?
And so they also encourage media tours. And I mean, you and I, we could go and check out the museum that's right next to the nuclear power plant. And it's all, they've published data constantly that it's safe and there's no, nuclear boogeyman in the air. But at the same time, I have a stinking suspicion that not a whole lot of people are visiting that museum. So it's still kind of scary.
All right, and coming up next, we have a special interview with David Wagner, media training specialist, public relations industry veteran, and Japan specialist. You're now listening to Tokyo Wave.
David Wagner is a seasoned Japan specialist who first came to Japan in 1982 and has lived and worked a total of 35 years in Japan.
He's most known for his media and crisis management work in Japan, Indo-Pacific, Europe, North America, and the Middle East.
Leading training teams in 2 well-known public relations agencies in Tokyo for about 15 years, David developed a reputation for superior messaging and media impact capabilities, and has been referred to as the best media trainer in Japan by the Prime Minister's office.
Fukushima was not only a professional experience for him, but it was a personal one too, and he plans to share some of those experiences and insights since that time with us today.
David holds a master's degree in Japanese economic and political system from the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey.
A native of Denver, Colorado, David served as communications advisor to the Democratic National Committee during the 2018 U.S. elections.
So, David, thank you so much for coming on Tokyo Wave.
Hey guys, it's nice to see you in the flesh.
Yes, finally.
We're actually just stick figures.
Your voices match your images. Let's put it that way.
I'm pretty sure that that's an insult, not a compliment.
It's a compliment.
So let's get right into it. Of course, last week was the 10-year anniversary of the March 11, 2011 Tohoku earthquake, tsunami, and of course, nuclear disaster. Where were you 10 years ago?
Well, that's a great question. Everyone's been asking that question. Where were you during 3/11? So I was in the deepest subway in Tokyo on the Oedo line, and the sensors in the ocean had picked up the oncoming earthquake and stopped the train 5 seconds before it hit. So there we were underground, and we stopped, and I was standing up holding one of those, support railings, and it shook for 6 minutes. It was scary. But, the interesting thing is nobody freaked out. everyone took out their cell phones and was trying to get a signal. And we stayed there for 20 minutes before we started moving because they want to make sure the tracks aren't bent so you can move forward. And then, of course, we crawled to the next station and everyone got out and the whole city was out on the street. It was quite an amazing sight. And I said, I'm not going anywhere. Let's get a hotel room. I found one with no gas, no water, but a bed to sleep in for the night, and then caught the 6 a.m. train the next morning. Yeah.
My jaw dropped when you said the Oeda line. For people that live in Tokyo, that line is very deep.
Yeah, it's the newest, so it's the deepest because they got to go below all the other lines to build it. Yeah.
Well, so it's funny that you mentioned that. Fun fact, the Oedo line was the first subway line to come back online after the earthquake on 3/11 in Tokyo because it was actually designed for disaster preparedness.
There we go. All right. Now we know.
Fun fact.
But, it was a frightening time for so many people. And I just thoughts go out to those who lost their lives and were displaced and are still displaced. It's been a terrible time. And so I thought, well, what can I do to help with my skill set? And so this is a true story. I contacted, without any prior connections, the Prime Minister's office and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and said, look, I'm a media trainer. I've been watching your press conferences. Let me help you. They were bad. The spokespersons were not trained. There was no central messaging, no synchronized messaging. And the Prime Minister's spokesperson, Noriyuki Shikata, was a fantastic spokesperson. I think he's been Japan's best deliverer of messages, in the time that I've been here, over 35 years. But he was the only one who was a seasoned specialist, and they needed help. So for 3 weeks, I got permission, and they watched me like a hawk, like, what's my intention? But I did this as an independent person. I wasn't representing an agency or anything. And for 3 weeks, I analyzed all their press conferences in English and gave them immediate feedback every day. Yeah.
Very cool. Just last week, we were talking about how much mismessaging was going on right after the earthquake, especially with the nuclear power plant. And I was in Florida. I was about to come to Japan at the time, and nobody knew what the hell was going on. So,
well, it was a combination of misinformation and disinformation from multiple sources. And I think some of it was by design, and some of it was just by sheer lack of skill or bad intention. I'm not sure. But, the result of that whole incident was pretty much the destruction of trust between the Japanese government and the people of Japan. And I don't know to what degree it's been repaired.
That's actually a very good point. I was at a lecture last year, right before lectures stopped happening in person because of the pandemic, actually. And it was a gathering of scientists to talk about risk communication. And at the lecture, a very famous journalist said that there was actually data and surveys that had been done that confirms just what you said. The lack of trust in scientists in Japan right now is at an all-time low.
Well, I'd say it's lower for lack of trust of the government itself. You can't lie.
They're competing.
Well, they're competing. Yeah, let's see who's going to win. You can't lie when there's relays of radiation, right? It's measurable. And they did lie for 2 months. It was a bad move. But, one of the other things I did is I started going into cyberspace like everybody else. And I found the two opposing views and brought them together and physically arranged for them to come to Japan and give a talk at the American Chamber about safety in the food, because food safety was a hot topic and a big topic, and it still is. And so one of the people I brought over was a pro-nuclear scientist named Wade Allison, who's British. He wrote the book called Radiation and Reason. And I also found a nuclear physicist who's Japanese, based in the States, named Akira Tokuhiro. And I put them together along with Shikata-san from the Prime Minister's office. And we did a panel discussion. We had 170 people there. And there were a lot of concerned mothers in particular. Are you telling me that the food is safe here? And they were saying, yeah. And, Wade Allison said there would be no deaths from radiation from this incident. And he's basically been right. I think there's been one confirmed case of death from radiation from a construction worker at the site. But, we can talk about iodine and we can talk about what's going on with people's thyroids, and some of those figures may not be public. I don't know. But that's another thing I wanted to do was to get involved in that and make an impact. And the third thing I did was I started a Facebook page. I'm still running it, called Japan Food Safety. And in the first couple of weeks, I had 500,000 hits. And, I've got about 5,000 people who read it on a weekly basis. So it's just volunteer, give your skills, help other people. I like to do that.
That's amazing. And I'm sure the Japanese government was extremely grateful for your help.
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because I was in Denver last year, and Shikata-san came to Denver. And he was at Denver University speaking, and I went up to him and he said, "Wow, how you doing? Let's have dinner." And he publicly acknowledged me and thanked me for helping the government at that Denver talk. So I've 10 years later, it came full circle. You give back, it comes back. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you bother him enough, you can get one of those cool diploma, like certificate of appreciation things.
Listen, I mean, Shikata-san, I'm a big fan of his. He's still in the government and they're moving him around. I think he's ambassadorial material.
Most definitely. I don't know Mr. Shikata nearly as good as you do, but I do know that most recently he was also involved with the communication efforts regarding the COVID-19 situation and travel from overseas back into Japan for foreign residents.
No, I'm not going to say a secret weapon, but he's one of Japan's stronger performers with great skill set. Japan doesn't have a lot of them. He's one of the ones that stands out.
Definitely could use a few more of him. Maybe there's like a nuclear cloning facility we can use.
So still while we're on the topic, nuclear cloning facility, you're funny. Still while we're on the topic, I want to talk a little bit about some of the issues related to nuclear power. We know that 60% of Japanese are against nuclear power even today. And, the protests right after Fukushima in the summer of 2011 peaked at about 180,000. And then the whole thing fizzled out. I was surprised that it happened, but it didn't last long.
It's funny you should mention anti-nuclear power sentiment. I had a chance to go to the Japanese Diet yesterday, and going there, I saw the protests, which happen every year on 3/11. And of course, every year after the 3/11 anniversary, there are protests, but they were originally quite large and mainly nonviolent, but they were pretty rowdy in the early days. And now it's really just, literally people who have nothing better to do.
A lot of them are retirees, right? They've got time to do, as you say.
It's not thousands or hundreds, but dozens.
Yeah, it's a couple dozen. So, let's look at some of the events after that happened that are kind of interesting. One of the ones that fascinates me is the ice wall. You remember that? I'm going to build this ice wall around the plant to freeze.
Are you talking about X-Men?
No. Yes, I am.
I'll shoot you with my ice wall.
We found the X-Men.
They're at Fukushima. And they're going to build this wall to stop groundwater from coming in and going out back into the ocean. Have you heard anything about it in the last 2 or 3 years? No. I mean, it's a gigantic waste of time.
It's like the X-Men. It's top secret.
It's top secret, yeah. It was a kind of a nothing burger, but I mean, the cleanup of Fukushima is the main story. And there were 1,000 tanks, over 1,000 tanks now filled with strontium, tritium, and cesium. 135, 137, that they want to release in the ocean now because they're running out of room. And so, one of the phrases that I learned in the event in 2011 from the physicist from Idaho was, the solution to pollution is dilution. And if you take it and put it in the water, you're diluting it. So
Johnny Cochran became a physicist?
From lawyer to physicist. So I think, it's a serious topic. And once they do this, and the fishermen are up in arms, because who's going to want to eat fish from Fukushima with tritium in the water? But I think the lesson that I've learned from my research is that the bottom feeders, the fish in the bottom of the ocean, are the ones you want to avoid. And I'm not sure exactly which ones those are, but they like to eat the bones of fish here as one of the delicacies. Don't eat the bones of fish. A lot of these things move through the meat of the fish over time, but it goes and accumulates in the bones. Another thing related to food, since that's one of my passions, is think about this. You go to a place to have pizza here, right? Now, if it's gas heated pizza, like, that's gas stove, I'm fine with it. But if it's wood, where did that wood come from? Are you getting Fukushima trees tainted with radionuclides burning into your pizza? I mean, that's how I started to think about the food chain. And I think Domino's uses gas. At least I'm hoping they do. But there's a lot of ancillary issues that I think the news is not covering.
Fukushima gas, the best gas in all of Japan.
I asked in the beginning, I used to go to the restaurants and I'd ask, do you have wood burn pizza? And they say, yeah. Well, where does the wood come from? And some of the upscale restaurants would say, well, we bring it from Kyushu. We've asked the same question. So I just think it's off everyone's radar now. Nobody's thinking about it.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about food safety and wood, I mean, obviously people aren't probably testing wood as much as you would hope that they would.
As it were. But, think about another thing, the soil that's contaminated. What are they doing with it? What do you use in part to make cement? You use soil. So, one of the things I don't want to do is buy a house that's been built after 2011, unless I know what the materials are from, right? I mean, you can go overboard with this stuff, but some of it is noteworthy. Absolutely worth considering.
Not to get too down any rabbit holes, but have you seen any reports or research or suggestions that things like soil, building materials, wood have been found with contamination years after the incident?
No, but I don't think anybody's looking. One of the organizations I'm a big fan of here is SafeCast. Have you heard of them?
Great organization.
They do these homemade kits to measure radiation, and they put them all over the Tohoku region so people could take their own cars and see what's going on in their neighborhoods. Wonderful organization. Some really good people working for them. They're global, but what they've done here in Japan is nothing short of phenomenal. They've mapped the whole country. Yeah.
Well, and it really was SafeCast that helped the people who stayed behind after the whole situation on March 11th have some sort of sense of safety, because there was a lot of misinformation, as we mentioned earlier. And with all that misinformation, the mind races and you don't think about the good things. You tend to think about the bad things.
That's right.
And one of the things that people were saying without sources was that there's radiation in the air and it's deadly. And, that's a pretty scary statement. And SafeCast really made waves, literally and metaphorically, to help squash those very dangerous rumors.
Well, yes. And they've shown through research and facts-based data that it is true. Unless you're near the plant in some of the areas that really got inundated with radiation, it's not too much of a problem. But there were 2 days where radiation clouds came over Tokyo, March 15th and March 21st, 2011. And they came over Tokyo because the winds changed and they came inland instead of blowing most of that radiation out to sea. So, here we are 10 years later. What are the cancer rates? I don't think the government's terribly interested in having those things made public. The other thing is they had these incineration towers that they put up all over the country. Do you remember that? They're supposed to have scrubbers to take out certain things in radiation. Well, they're all over the country, and some of them were built right as a result of Tohoku. So they were taking refuge and destroyed homes and things and shipping them to different parts of Japan to be burned. And so lots of theories kept coming out. If you're taking all this stuff and you're burning it all over the country, then the levels of radiation are equal. So, I don't want to get into conspiracy theories here, but, your mind can wander with some of this stuff.
Aaron, you have any tinfoil?
I might have some under here.
Bust it out. We need the thick stuff.
Well, I caught a lot of heat because, when you fly in an airplane from overseas, when I go back to the States, you get more radiation than you would being in Japan. And to double it, where I live in Denver, or lived in Denver until recently, I moved back, is the background radiation level in Denver and Boulder is higher than most places in the United States. So, everyone's like, well, what are you talking about radiation? You're getting more exposure on a daily basis where you live.
Must be all of those omelets.
The Denver omelet. That's it. There we go.
Why is that a thing?
Yeah, I'm not going to go there. I don't know the answer to that.
I thought there was like a gross or sinister answer.
So once long ago. No, I don't really know why there is a Denver omelet, actually. Yeah.
David, one quick question. You talked about them taking the nuclear waste, putting it back into the ocean. I think this is a story that's really been picked up by the foreign media, and I've even had friends ask me about this. So what's going on with that? Did they decide not to do that?
No, they're in process of deciding they have to do it. They don't have another choice. The issue is How much of certain types of radiation, radionuclides can they take out of the water? How much can they dilute it and diminish the impact? They're running out of space. They've got no choice. Yeah.
Wow.
I think the most logical answer to this question is they're waiting until people have forgotten about it.
Well, so this is, you guys were talking earlier in the cast here today that it's a 30-year deal to clean up. It's more than that.
Yeah, 2051.
It's a 50-year deal.
Jeez.
Yeah. I don't know if I'll be alive. I won't be alive to see it. Yeah.
Dang. It was freaky too. We had a pretty big earthquake, I think, 2 weeks ago. Right off the coast of Fukushima again.
There have been a lot of aftershocks. Even yesterday and today, there were some 4.0s. Yeah.
I did feel something earlier today.
It's maybe to people outside Japan, this is going to sound ridiculous, but there's this thing, it's a word, hitori jishin, like you're having an earthquake by yourself. People got so used to earthquakes and the ground moving and looking to see something on the wall or outside to tell whether there's an actual earthquake. It's sort of ingrained in the culture. I mean, at least maybe once a week, I'll think, oh, is that an earthquake or am I paranoid?
Well,
or both.
So that's right. And the earthquake standards have changed and buildings are required to have certain, standards now. I think the last time was 1988 or 1991. I don't remember exactly, but so this brings up
earthquake standards. The last one was after the Kobe earthquake.
So
late 90s.
Yeah. Kobe was 95, I think. Yeah. So this brings up the issue of why did they build nuclear plants on tectonic plates? I mean, I never figured it out. Not only that, the design of the General Electric plant at Fukushima, the backup generators were in the basement, which could be flooded. I mean, who thought about this? Or who didn't think about it, I guess is the question.
Maybe the lead engineer called in sick on design the basement day.
He said, "Well, I'm not getting my stock options, so I'm just going to put that in the basement." Yeah, I'll show them. Yeah.
Yikes! It probably was something that stupid.
I hate to speculate, but I can only imagine that it probably had something to do with cost. And the other thing about the seaside locations is that, I mean, where there is a port near the seaside, there's a lot of development. But I mean, to make a nuclear power plant or any power plant for that matter, you have to find somewhere that's kind of far away from people and there's space. And you really can't find that much space in the middle of the country because all of the flat lands got farms on it. And last time I checked, farmers don't like nuclear power plants in their backyard.
So the seawall that they were warned to build or encouraged to build before, they said that 1,000 years ago, there was a big quake here, like it could happen again. They knew it could happen. They didn't do anything about it. There's still no seawall there at Fukushima. And where are all the large soil bags, those enormous bags they're putting all the tainted soil in? Where are they all being stacked? Right on the beach next to the ocean, waiting for the next tsunami. Right?
Yeah, I think we've seen those photos are definitely like in a lot of foreign, whenever they talk about Fukushima, I've seen those photos many times. And it looks absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. So they'll wash it inland, then wash it back out.
They should take a note out of Florida. The seawall business is a booming.
I thought that was the Sea World.
both.
Right. Well, now that we've scared the bejesus out of our Japan resident followers, let's switch gears. So, David, you've been doing business in Japan for more than 30 years. Could you tell us about your Japan story?
Yeah, sure. So, as you said earlier, I first came here as an exchange student in 1982 in Osaka at Kansai Gaidai in Hirakata City. It was a short period of time. It was half a year, but I really fell in love with the place. I had already planned to go to school in Paris the next year. So I went to France and went to the Sorbonne for a year and studied a bit of French, finished up school in Colorado, and then decided to get a master's at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, focusing on Japan's political system. And so, that was the education background, but I came to Japan after graduating at age 26. And I started working in the corporate world, doing corporate training. And you're saying, what's the link between policy studies and corporate training? And the answer is there's none, except that I had done a summer internship with this company and they invited me to come and work. And so that actually started what became my sort of consulting and training career. And I worked in different training companies for 9 years before going out on my own. And I've been out on my own almost 25 years here. The first year, of course, when you go out on your own as a consultant, is you starve. But then every year it gets a little easier. And so, I sort of semi-retired 7 years ago, and I had 53 clients at that time by myself. I didn't have a KK, Kabashiki Gaisha. I just did everything on my own. So the profit margins were pretty high. But I just decided I was exhausted. I was working 29, 30 days a month. And the money was great, but I didn't have much of a life. So I decided to change that. And as I've been working, part-time, when I find an interesting project I want to do, I do it, and collaborations. But I think Japan's always been an opportunity land for me, much more so than America was. Just really, really blossomed here. And I started also in the beginning using some of my journalism as interests, started writing biweekly columns for the Mainichi Daily News on U.S.-Japanese relations, took that and made it into a book. Then I went to the Daily Yomiuri, started doing another series on communication, took that and made it into a book, took the 2 books and called up NHK and said, I want to do a TV show on NHK Educational. Here's my books. Here's my idea. They actually listened to me and gave me my own TV show. So I had my own TV show on NHK for 2 years, in 1999 and 2000. It was number one. We had a great time. And then that led to more books. I published 24 books. And then that led to more business. It was just, it's all about building on what you've done. It's worked well for me.
So when you first came to Japan, Japan in the 1980s was a very different place.
Yeah.
We've talked to people who talk about, the excesses of the bubble economy and the crazy stuff that was going on in Ginza and Roppongi, and it was a party.
Yeah.
What was your experience like?
Well, it was toward the tail end of the bubble. I came in 87 after graduate school, and it was good times. The economy was really doing really well. And it was easy for me to get a job. And there weren't a lot of foreigners here. There were not a lot of competitors. Now it's amazing, right? It's, almost 3 million non-Japanese living and working in Japan. It's almost 2% of the population. It was a total fraction of that 35 years ago. So yeah, I know about the party stories. I didn't partake in many of them. But I think the bulk of my time here, as you know, when the bubble burst in 1989-90, has been tough times for Japan. And I think it's amazing to me that it's 30 years later, the stock market's coming out now and getting close to 30,000 on the Nikkei. That was 30 years in coming, New bubbles can be very good for the stock market.
That's what all the cool kids are talking about, those stonks.
Yeah, let's do GameStop. AMC, baby.
Oh yeah, all in, all the way to the moon.
Now listen, think about that, right? GameStop was a $5 stock in January. It went up to $500 in a matter of weeks. Then it went down to 50. Now it's gone up to 225.
Yeah, I heard it's back up again. And AMC also is back up?
AMC, I listened to a really interesting interview on CNBC today about AMC. This guy has the guts to say this should be a 1 penny stock.
Ouch.
It's $11 now. He goes, and that's generous.
Yeah.
They can never pay back their debt. So,
yeah, I wouldn't want to be a movie theater right now. And I think even before the pandemic, they can't have been doing that great.
They were in 2019. Then they were able to manage their debt, but their debt levels have really increased. So no, this pandemic is changing everything, as we know, right? But we adapt and go with the technology, go with the times.
For sure. I'm definitely very jealous about the time spent in Japan in the 1980s. Part of the podcast aesthetic is the whole vaporwave, which is all based off of the 1980s Japan bubble era.
Well, of course, neither Aaron or I, for listeners who might not know, were able to experience Japan in the 80s or 90s. So it's an object of our fascination in one way of saying. But I always look at the content that was produced in Japan in the 80s and even in the 90s. I still think that aesthetic was largely the same. And it's just so different than the Japan that I came to in the mid 2000s, where young people were not materialistic. They were, very casual and really, you heard a lot about, the young people are different. They did yutori kyoiku, which is, they really loosened up the Japanese academic system and made it a lot less rigorous and strict. And of course, that made the boomers endlessly complain about these rotten old kids don't know nothing. And that was the Japan that I came to. So it's interesting to think about, what's the difference in, of course, 30, 40 years.
Well, so my take on all of this is that nothing has really changed. We can talk about levels of materialism if you want, but I know from my work and my experience that the culture doesn't change very much. Almost everything is repeated. And I think Japanese are just putting their focus on different things. Technology's been the focus instead of material goods. And most people are spending their time, as we are, on their cell phones and on their PCs. And they're either watching Netflix or they're doing something else and doing chat rooms, or who knows where it goes. It's just been replaced with something else.
It's funny you talk about technology as a status symbol. And one interesting data point, and this is actual data, not BS, Japan is the highest and most profitable market for Apple's devices. And among developed nations, Japan has the highest percentage of iOS users versus Android. And of course, not to knock on Android, but the average price of Android devices is significantly lower than Apple devices. So that is to say that Japan is really, I think, the only developed country where mobile phone users overwhelmingly choose the more expensive Apple option.
A form of materialism, right? Yeah.
For sure. I heard
it says Pro, dude.
It's got 3 cameras. Who needs 2, right?
Yeah. With the whole Clubhouse thing, it's limited to Apple right now. And I think in the US, the discrepancy, the average income of an iPhone holder is $30,000 more than that of an Android user. So that's had something to do with the whole culture of Clubhouse for like the past couple of months.
So it's a bunch of trust fund startup bros. Big surprise there.
and all Japan. Let's see what happens.
One and the same.
So, David, you are a well-known media training specialist. How did you start doing that? And what do you think makes a good media training?
Okay, that's right up my alley. So my story of how it started is not very glamorous. I finished my NHK shows, and the problem was I was being labeled an English teacher, and I'm not. But I used that as a mechanism to become well known to do other things. And one of the things I wanted to do was transform it into using my brain in a new way. And I wanted to combine my love of media with my skills in training. And so there was a job opening at a PR firm for a media trainer. And there were 60 applicants, and I won. And the funny thing about it was they had only formed the media training division like a month or 2 before. They had no practical experience doing it. And so I, from the beginning, just decided to create this in my own vision and understand what it was, and did a lot of studying on my own. One of the things I did was I noticed that they were spending 150,000 yen on every training on a camera crew. That's about $1,500. And I said, and we're doing like 100 of these a year, guys, right? So that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Why don't we do the video ourselves and save a little money? They're like that. So how can we cut costs? How can we streamline the process? How can we become more efficient, more effective in what we do? Without giving any trade secrets, what I do is I have a very short time with executives, ambassadors, billionaires, government officials, 1 to 2 hours per person to transform their behavior. So I developed my own strategy, my own method for doing this. And it's really taken off because people are calling me all the time because think about it. When you get the CEO, a big, powerful CEO of a big corporation, how much time does anybody get of their day? 10 minutes, maybe? They're giving me 2 hours. So I've got to make it work for them. And I've got to make the aha moment from the beginning. And that's what I do. I make them fail in a polite and effective way. So they'll go like, well, why did I say that? I go, let's try that again.
Wow.
And it works. It works. Everything's videotaped. They can take it with them. They can study on their own. And the thing about the training world is you're always worried about people, quote unquote, trying to steal or copy what you do. And I learned this early on. In 2003, a couple of years after I'd been on board the PR firm, I did an American Chamber talk. We had about 125 people there. And I realized from looking at the participant list that the bulk of them were my competitors coming to watch what I do. So I didn't do that again. Yeah, I learned my lesson.
Do you have any advice for maybe younger people who are also here in Japan, have their own business, looking to get into business? This media training, especially with these CEOs, sounds very interesting. I have some friends that are getting into the whole business coaching field right now, especially like with social media and everything. It's kind of really hot. How do you build that initial trust? I'm curious, like with the CEOs before you meet them.
Well, you don't. They don't know who you are.
Okay.
It's easy now when I've got gray hair. It's hard if you're 21 years old and you're going in to talk to a 60-year-old CEO. And he's sort of like, what am I doing with this? And I had to do that in the beginning because that's the age I was when I started this stuff.
Oh, wow.
So the way in which I did it, I figured out was to make sure that they fail in the beginning so they give me the time that I need. I've never had anybody stand up and leave, ever. Never.
Very impressive.
Yeah. Everyone develops their own style. They has their own. One thing is for sure is my job is not to talk. My job is to lead. They're the ones who need to do the talking. I don't need to improve my skill. They do. So how do you do that? And that's the same with coaching. Coaching is all about asking questions and letting people have self-discovery and come up with their own strategies and their own plans. It's the same basic idea, right? But I'm getting paid to create behavioral change in a very short period of time. And they can see it in an hour to an hour and a half, maybe 2. So the proof is in the pudding. You know, why are you paying me so much? Well, look what I just did for you guys. And there are not many people who can do it.
It's very impressive. Did you have any previous experience coaching before you did this here in Japan?
So you remember that I said that I started training with a company when I got out of graduate school. So I had about 9 years under my belt before I went out on my own.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And my family, my father's a professional trainer. He teaches transactional analysis, which is about using what's called ego states to get into people's map of the world. That's neurolinguistics, and learn how people communicate either effectively or ineffectively and get them to change their state of mind so that they're more effective. So I grew up with that. I came from a training family and I just transformed it. I didn't really want to train that stuff. That stuff wasn't interesting to me, but to use that in the training to get into people's map of the world is very effective.
I have a weird question. What is it like to be the kid of a trainer?
Self-analyzed all the time.
Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, actually,
how are you feeling?
Actually, it's interesting. My father gives me a lot of advice all the time. It drives me crazy. He goes, "Hey, look, I'm not charging you. It's free." I go, "Yeah, but it's not wanted." That's the difference.
I recently, one of my Japanese friends, I discovered a talent she has, and she can basically, she has a system for figuring out on the Myers-Briggs scale, what personality type someone is. And she can do it very, very quickly. And she gets the people to take a couple tests that she approves of. And what you're talking about now and what I heard from her, it's like this really powerful skill set that I've really never been exposed to. And I feel like I'm missing out. Just the ability to kind of like psychoanalyze people and figure out where they're at. Would you give is there any weight to Myers-Briggs in your opinion, or do you?
I mean, they all have validity. They're shown scientifically through data and historical analysis to have, impact and be a useful tool. I never use any of that stuff. I use intuition.
Okay.
Because, I have to read somebody very, very quickly. A lot of the training I did in my early days here was business communication training, where you're in front of 30 people and you've got to read the audience really quickly to decide who wants to be there and who doesn't, and who's going to be a troublemaker and who's not. In my years of training, I've only had 2 incidences in business communication training where I had a problem. And one of them was in Singapore for an airline that had hired me, and some guy just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And during the first break at 9:45 in the morning, I went to HR and I said, "Get him out of my class. I got a job to do." So, it happened once in Japan. That's it. That's it in 35 years, So you control what you can control, and I can control the process that I use. And I have a job to do. I can't let an impediment stop me from doing it, Pull him out of the class. Get him out. I call my friend Vinny. "Hey, Vinny, would you take care of this guy for me?"
Well, if you ever need a lackey to, stand outside with a pair of dark sunglasses and a black suit, don't hire me. I'm scrawny.
I was thinking about you, Parker. You'd be perfect.
No, this is really interesting. Sorry to dig so deep into the whole methodology and everything.
In your work, I'm sure that you've developed a very strong sense of looking at people speaking, and from that getting a sense of whether they're telling the truth, whether they're bullshitting, what kind of person they are, and you get all kinds of different insights. And especially doing so many media trainings for so many high-profile individuals such as CEOs, ambassadors, etc., you've got this incredible encyclopedia of data on how humans behave. What kind of telltale signs would you say that it's sort of like, if you're playing a card game, people have their tell. What are some common tells that you see, and what do they mean?
Well, so it's an interesting question, but I'm not in the business of telling if people are lying or not. I'm in the business of helping people deliver their messages. And I'm not in the business of judging whether those messages are worthy and full of value or not. I'm there to make them deliver it effectively. So, I do have limits. Will I work for a prostitution company, or will I work for a gun company? Will I work for a smoker or tobacco company? And the answer is perhaps. I'll give you an example. I worked for a tobacco company once, and I tested them before I worked for them, whether or not it met my validity issues. And I said to them, if I asked the question, how do you feel producing a product that is proven to produce cancer in the body? And their answer was, we're transparent on our label about what the potential of tobacco can do to the body. And I said, fine, I'll work for you. I'm not interested in helping people lie, but, it's not up to me to be the judge and the jury. That's not what I'm hired to do. I do some media messaging refinement when I'm asked to do so. And oftentimes it's interesting, sort of from a meta perspective. I have a lot of companies with big PR firms and big PR divisions. And I look at some of their messaging and I go I wouldn't say it that way. And sometimes I have the courage to speak up, but most of the time that's not what I'm there for. I'm there to enlighten people and make them realize what they're doing and what they need to do, and take them where they need to go.
Well, a bad message confidently said can oftentimes sound and be perceived a lot better than a good message poorly said.
Yes. And that was what I found with the Fukushima assistance that I did, 10 years ago. But, I watch public speakers. I watch politicians. And I don't necessarily watch them only for what they're doing on a performance level, but I listen to the content and analyze it. We can say what we want about Donald Trump. Some people love him. 74 million Americans do, or at least they vote for him. But I look at his messaging. He had brilliant messaging. He wasn't the right messenger. Obviously, he had a lot of problems. But Make America Great Again, it's a short, easy to remember key message. That's exactly what I teach people to do. Make America Great Again. 4 words, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse. That's what you're supposed to do. Repetition works, right? So he had some brilliant people working for him. I don't particularly think Donald Trump was brilliant, but we could talk about that if you want.
No, I mean, during his presidency, I remember so many times just thinking, man, what's going on with this PR team? Because he was just really quick. Even when he would do debates, right? He would just find his opponent's weaknesses and just their exploits and repeat it, the entire debate.
Yeah, well, I mean, we know the disaster he turned out to be. I mean, he's fostered and fired up the base and caused great social disharmony in the United States. I mean, he went off message most of the time. He was not on message, and it showed.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think a lot of people early on in the Trump presidency referred to him like a drunk uncle, saying all the things that, you're not supposed to say, and they're politically incorrect and all of those bad things. But some people like that.
Well, but he was all about divide and conquer, not unification. And in the end, he didn't win a second term because most of the country thought that's not what they want. Mm-hmm. So he had his 4 years in the sun. I don't think he'll be reelected.
So speaking of politics, so you also did a master's in Japanese policy. David, how do you rate the Suga administration, which is now 6 months old?
Well, I'm not going to go on record for my personal opinions, but what I will say is there are strengths and areas of improvement in the Suga administration. That's the end of my answer. That's the kind of thing I teach people to say.
Oh.
For me, it's bittersweet, and I'll go into a little bit more depth because apparently I'm not afraid of anything, as Prime Minister Suga is known for being a pretty scary dude sometimes. But is that the strange aroma of hands around my neck?
I hear one of those helicopters again that we had last week.
The sound of a rope hitting a window.
What's that red circle that keeps moving around you?
Well, can I comment on something? I mean, one thing that's interesting about policy formation that I've learned from working with about a half a dozen ministries here, we know that the ministries are siloed. We know they often don't talk to each other. But I think that's not totally true. It depends on the situation. But the policy formation, it takes a long time to create itself and manifest itself. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why they don't have the level of vaccine program implementation that they do, for example, in the United States or a little country like Israel, which is now in the upper 90% of vaccinations. They take a long time to form the policy, and they're very fast to execute once that's been formed. The United States, the opposite. We make the policy quickly, and it takes a long time to execute most of the time, and then we change it again. So my take on what's going on now with the vaccine.
Got to keep all those lawyers employed.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's a machine. But my guess is, from my gut from 35 years here, is that they're doing what they're doing for reasons we don't know. And they're making sure that everything's ready to go so that when they execute, it's going to be very rapid. That's what I'm going to put my money on.
Well, I hope that you're right.
That's a great key message. I hope that you're right.
Same.
Like button. Subscribe. Remember to follow and subscribe. Yes, I want that damn vaccine too. But before we move on the Suga administration, you know, it's sort of like the difference between Trump to Biden when we're looking at Abe to Suga. I mean, Suga was really a policy brain for the Abe administration, and he's an ideas guy. He has lots of ideas. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, but he has ideas, which is a rarity in Japanese policy circles, I'll be honest. And that sort of dynamism is exactly the sort of person who we want as a prime minister of Japan. However, Prime Minister Abe just set the bar so high for communication. And he didn't start, right out, going out of the gate with awesome communication ability, but he improved and he got better. And I mean, he had 8 years to do it. But by the end of his administration, I mean, he did some pretty cool things communications wise. And there were some missteps, but he was on television all the time. Now we've had Prime Minister Suga for 6 months, and granted, it has only been 6 months, but it has been 6 months, of course. And before Prime Minister Abe, I think we'll remember that prime ministers sort of changed pretty much every year for several years. And a lot of people are, rumors in the halls of the Japanese Diet that maybe that's going to be the deal again. And I think for having a stable Japanese government, that is not the best of situations. However, in order to stay prime minister, Prime Minister Suga has to keep a certain level of popularity. And it's doing a little bit better right now at the time of this recording, but especially just even a few months ago, is dangerously low. And it's my personal opinion that it's dangerously low because of that lack of communication, not being in front of the TV cameras. And even when he's in front of the TV cameras, not being candid with reporters, being very couched in his delivery. And when he is on TV and he is speaking, what he says is not very spicy or memorable. And he just doesn't look that great when he says it.
So my take from the world that I come from on is that he needs my skill set. He needs to be trained, and he needs to learn how to deliver with impact. And if what you're saying is true, and I think it is, it's solvable.
So, Japan Prime Minister's office, call David Wagner today at 888 Talk Good. That's 888 Talk Good.
Well, think about this. Talk good. Yeah,
That's great.
all of us have to deliver messages every day, and we're doing it in our offices. We're doing it at home. It's the way in which we communicate, and are we being brief and impactful? And that's the skill. What I tell people is, when you're in the media, you don't have a lot of airtime. Look at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, for example. You see a quote from somebody in a story. How long is that quote? 1, 2 sentences? You got to learn to talk in 1 and 2 sentences. And that's a paradigm shift and a mindset shift. That's just a good thing to do in any case. Nobody wants to listen to paragraphs. They want to listen to sentences. That's what Twitter is all about. We've got to start learning to talk in Twitter feed, because that's where it's all going. And that's what I would suspect is Prime Minister Suga, his issues are repairable. Yeah.
Cool story, bro. LOL. Dog meme. Same.
Hashtag Dogecoin.
To the moon. No, he said speak like Twitter as in length, not full of memes, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. 240 characters. That's
You can put 240 memes.
So, David, being in Japan for all these years, I'm sure you have had some wacky and interesting experiences. Is there anything that you can share with us?
Well, I have a Yakuza story, mafia story.
We like those.
Yes, please.
I know you guys have plenty of them, but I only have one. So I was.
Oh, don't look at me like that.
Yeah, we're not that bad.
Forget about it.
What's the equivalent of Vinny in Japanese?
I don't think there is a stereotypical gangster name in Japanese.
We just the punch perm and the green suits. So speaking of punch perms and green suits, I was sitting outside of a bar in Tokyo one day, and I was like doing some emails on my cell. It was about 8 o'clock at night, and this drunk Yakuza in punch perm hair and a green suit came up to me, and he waves his hand and he goes, "Haro!" And I looked up and I said, "Konnichiwa," hello. And he goes, "Where from?" And I said, "I'm from America." He goes, "Oh, Bin Laden. And that's what started the conversation. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is a moment in time I'm not going to get again. So I said, do I want to get up and leave, or do I want to talk to this guy? I said, let's talk to him. He's drunk. He's harmless, right? And they're mostly pussycats anyway, right? So unless money's involved. So I started talking to him, and I said, I said in Japanese, I've never met a person of your character before. Can I ask you some questions? He goes, yeah. I said, look, I'm looking at all 10 of your fingers, and I noticed they're all there. You haven't lost a pinky. Because we know when you do something that the mafia doesn't like, to atone for your sins, you cut off half the pinky. Mm-hmm. And he puts out his fingers and he pulls a prosthesis off of his pinky. He had lost his pinky, and he had a fake pinky.
Oh, wow.
So then I asked him, well, what'd you do to lose that? He goes, I was in prison for 19 years. I killed somebody. I said, okay, yeah. And then he said, you want to go drinking? And I thought, okay, again, this is not going to happen again. I said, yeah, let's go for a drink. So we went to this bar. We walked in, and everyone bowed to him like they knew who he was. He's a big fish. And he unzips his man purse, and he's full of 10,000 yen notes. And he whips one on the table, and he said, what do you have? And I said, I'll have a beer. And he'd have a beer. So we sat there and had a beer, and he goes, you want another one? I said, no, I got to be going. I think it's time for me to move along, but thank you very much for your hospitality. So that was a story you don't get in Denver.
Interesting,
very often.
But you were sitting down, you're having a beer with the gangster. What did he talk about? Superficial nothingness. What am I going to talk to him about? Policy initiatives. I mean, the thing is, he gave me one of his business cards, his meishi. He had 5 business cards. And he pulled out 5 different ones, and he gave me this one. He said, if you need anything, just give me a call. I'm like, yeah, sure. I'll be giving you a call. I need to take care of somebody over there in Minatoku. You can give him my regards. No, I never called him. Never called him. But that was an interesting experience. It was about 10 years ago. Yeah. Wow, a fake pinky. I've never noticed a fake pinky before.
Well, there you go. See what you learned today? Prosthesis talk.
The more you know. Another meme.
There's probably some like high-end Japanese clubs, or like in order to get in, like the guys, like club or whatever, the what do you call him, the bouncer probably checks everyone's fingers to make sure that they're not Yakuza.
So. Hey, you're not cool enough. Back of the line.
Well, you know, the mafia historically, right? There are three traditional pillars of power in this country, right? There's political organizations, there's business organizations, and there's government. And they all work together to form policy and implement policy together. But the fourth pillar is the mafia, because they allow certain things in society that society needs to go on. And they serve a role here. But they've been greatly diminished by the police because they're a cancer on society. Let's be honest, they are. Vice had a very interesting interview with a bunch of Yakuza recently. I think Jake Adelstein was involved with that. He's got a movie coming out.
No, it's a HBO Max TV show. Actually.
It's a TV show. Okay. Yeah, I can't wait to see it. I think he's going to be laughing all the way to the bank on that one.
No, it's very interesting you bring up the Yakuza as actually being a pillar of society here, because I think, and as you said, they have been greatly diminished, but for a long time, you know, amongst most of the developed nations, you know, you had a organized crime unit in a developed country that was more or less, I don't want to use the word accepted, but, you know, known by other countries to be very present in the society. And personally, from my experiences and what I've seen, not all the stuff they do is quote unquote bad. They actually have some like very interesting, like charitable activities and stuff going on.
Well, I mean,
they give out Halloween candy.
Yeah, that's controversial, right? And the Kobe earthquake in '95, they were one of the first people there to help give out blankets and food.
This is the most, talked
about. Yeah, but it's not altruistic, right? I mean, they're doing it for a reason. Mm-hmm. Yeah, just like everybody has reasons for doing what they do. So, yeah, I'm not a specialist on the topic, but I do think they're an interesting part of Japanese society.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I don't want to speak for anybody, but people I know that have come in contact with Yakuza here who are foreigners, it's all really positive stories. I haven't heard any really negative stuff, unless it's some guy that's like, you know, getting into something that he shouldn't be in the first place. I've actually heard stories similar of, you know, people at izakayas joining tables with a group of Yakuza, and they're very hospitable and very nice, very warm.
Yeah, I have my doubts about that, but that's just me. I'm not going to be joining a group of Yakuza at a bar uninvited. I don't think so. Thanks, I'll pass.
Yeah.
So in closing, David, is there anything you'd like to say? Any shout outs, etc.?
Well, I mean, let's just sort of my experience on how things have changed for me in the work world based on COVID-19. I'm doing all of my trainings on either Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And it really is wonderful, time zones aside, to be able to go to, you know, Bangalore, India, or go to Hong Kong or Beijing or Singapore and just sit at home and do it. And I like it. You know, in 2019, I was on 36 international flights that year for work. I'd come in, use Tokyo as my base, and fly out, go to Hong Kong, go to Kuala Lumpur, go to Singapore, or go to Beijing. That's just crazy. I'm happy COVID has changed this world for me, because now you can do online training and it's not seen as a weird thing to do. People like it, and they can sit at their homes and do it with you. And it's really transformed, the technology's transformed the workscape, the landscape for work.
You know, that's a really important point. And I think this whole shift to virtual meetings, online meetings, and doing things at home and not necessarily in person or at an office is really an earth-moving development in Japan specifically, because the work culture in this country is, or has been, until the pandemic, so traditional. And in the first few months after the pandemic became a thing and we had this state of emergency last year, a lot of companies and people were expressing concern that they couldn't do business in such an atmosphere. But as now we are into year 2 of Le Pandemic, as it is known in France, people are adapting, companies are adapting, and lots of Japanese companies have taken the initiative to say that even after this whole thing is over with, we're going to keep doing it like this.
Well, but they're fighting as they do it, I think, because they want to do it because they don't have to pay for expensive real estate to rent offices, and that's saving a lot of money. But on the flip side, cross-culturally, right? Japan, we know, is a group-oriented country. They like to work in teams, and they like to see each other face-to-face. And I don't think in America, where we come from, that's a big deal. People prefer to work individually more than with teams. I mean, there's some Americans who like to work with teams, but it's not been a huge transformation like it has been for Japan. The question everyone is asking is, of course, is this going to be a long-lasting change, telework? And I think there'll be some impact longer term, but I think most Japanese prefer to go back to the office. That's what I've heard. So.
And it really depends, of course. And there's sort of that generational gap too. So of course the older people, and when I say, older people in the workforce, we're talking about people in their 50s and 60s. And of course in Japan, also people in their 70s and 80s who are also actively working in some companies, do tend to have that desire to get back to the office and express frustration with this, fully remote environment that we find ourselves locked in right now. And then you have people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who are, it depends on the person. And I think this is sort of more split, but from the data that I've seen most recently, it does seem like the majority of people in the, quote unquote, younger age group among workers in Japan tend to shift or lean towards wanting to have a more flexible and remote focused work style versus having to go into the office every day.
That's probably true. It's probably generational. Yeah. Some truth to that.
For sure. Personally, I can't ever imagine having to go back into an office. Of course, I'll go into an office, but just everything can be done remote now.
Yeah. At the same time, though, not to play the devil's advocate on purpose, but, not having meetings among team members and not being able to have some sort of regular personal face-to-face interaction, you do lose something there.
For sure.
It's hard to quantify it. I think, it's hard to put data points behind it, but I keep on being reminded of an anecdote of a fully remote company who had been fully remote for, years and years and years. They would still have like a once a year get together.
Right. This is important.
The reason why they did this apparently is because without any sort of face-to-face interaction at all, they found that team members tended to be more aggressive towards one another.
You see them less. It's
the less I see you, the less I like you.
Yeah, exactly.
Wouldn't make a very good insult, but
well, again, I think for almost every business, it's a transformational change. And for me as a trainer, when I have to do group work now, I have to do these virtual teams in cyberspace, right? I don't really like it. I prefer one-on-one training, but it is true. If I'm in a room with 30 people, it's a lot easier for me to manage that situation than it is to have 6 breakout groups. That's true.
In closing, there's one thing that I think you have an opinion on that I'd like to ask if you have an opinion about. Recently, I was talking to a client actually about how this sort of constant situation with Zoom and Google Meet and these online meetings have made people perhaps marginally, but more self-aware because they can see themselves. And have you also noticed this trend in your trainings? Do you think that people are getting just a little bit more camera savvy, even though it's, not like a television camera, but
yeah, it's self-taught. I mean, I know there are services that provide that, and I think they're growing, but what's been fascinating to me is the informality of acceptance now. You don't have to wear a suit when you're on a Zoom call. It's okay if your cat walks by you on the table, right? It's really interesting. In America, it used to be that kind of thing was really frowned upon. Now everyone's just like totally used to it. I think it's not totally accepted here in Japan yet. But yeah, I think how people look is part of the messaging process, the visual message. And it is important for sure.
Most definitely. It's weird for me because I still come into the office every day because I'm a product of the 1920s, apparently. But I freak people out because I'm the only person, wearing business attire in an office. They're like, what the hell's wrong with you?
Well, and I always tell people there's no problem in dressing up, but there's a problem in dressing down. I mean, young people say to me, how can I be effective as a messenger? And I say, well, some things you can control easily. It's how you look, right? Mm-hmm. If you look powerful, if you look like you're wearing nice clothes, people are going to give you more respect because people judge a book by its cover. That's how it works. So, one of the things that's been interesting since I came back and finished my quarantine here is I've been growing a beard. It's about 2.5 weeks old now in the scruffy look. But I'm going to give it a go now because I don't have work for a couple more weeks, and I'm doing things I wouldn't normally do. I would never grow a beard in Japan. I had a company I worked for in Yokohama for 12 years, and they had a policy of no facial hair on any of their, I don't know about the women, but they said the men can't have any facial hair. And so I would always shave.
There's a bar for that in Kabukicho.
There probably is. But I would always shave to adapt to their expectations. And I think it's really interesting. Let's see where this goes. I'm curious myself.
Well, I hear ZZ Top's looking for new members. Well, thank you, David, so much for coming on Tokyo Wave today, and welcome back to Japan.
Thanks, guys. It was really a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you. Hey, listeners, that's right. You listener right there.
Who do you think should be our next guest on Tokyo Wave? Let us know. Drop us a line at wave@tokyowave.jp.
We hope you enjoyed Tokyo Wave.
If you haven't already, you can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube.
Join us again next week on Tokyo Wave.